The Coral Reef Biome by Elizabeth, Maggie, and Allie. Let's start with some fun background info on this biome. First of all, Coral Reef Biome is an aquatic biome. Coral reefs are largely formed from calcium carbonate skeletons of corals and are located in the clear photic zone of tropical oceans. These biomes are sensitive to temperatures and typically live in temperatures between 20 degrees Celsius and 30 degrees Celsius. They require high oxygen level sand and are excluded by high inputs of fresh water and nutrients. Corals are dependent on growing on top of solid substrate for attachment. Plus, many different organisms live within the coral reefs. Unicellular algae usually lives within the tissues of the corals. Fish and invertebrate also live within the corals. Animal diversity on the coral reefs rivals that of tropical forests. In order to get a better look at the food structure of coral reefs, we have created a food web demonstrating the transfer of energy between the 20 organisms displayed. The animals at the top of the chain, like the reef shark, Goliath grouper, and moray seal, mostly have arrows pointing towards them, like the shark, which means that animals such as the eel and sea turtle are consumed by the shark. Meanwhile, many organisms at the bottom of the food web have arrows pointing away from them, meaning that they are the ones being consumed. For example, the zooplankton at the bottom is being consumed by the rice coral and also the box crab. Meanwhile, the animals and organisms in the middle of the food web act as both predator and prey. For example, the reef octopus is both food for the Goliath grouper, and it also consumes the giant barrel sponge over here. Different types of relationships like these are seen within the food web. The first is mutualism. Mutualism is the way two organisms of different species exist in a relationship in which each individual benefits from the activity of the other. An example of mutualism in a coral reef biome is demonstrated is the unicellular algae that lives within the tissues of the corals. The algae are benefited by the corals, which are offered protection from predation to the small plants. The corals are benefited by the presence of algae, which provides that coral with organic molecules and nutrients that supplement its color and growth. This relationship between algae and the corals benefits the entire reef by providing nutrients that encourages growth from the entire reef. Competition. Competition is a symbiotic relationship between or among living things that compete for limited resources such as food, space, shelter, mating, and ecological status. An example of competition in a coral reef is between the parrotfish and the butterfly fish, which both compete for resources in the coral reef. As a result, both have adapted to protecting themselves against predation. The parrotfish, to protect themselves, swims with venomous rabbitfish, which are rarely attacked. Butterfly fishes often swim in pairs and are able to hide themselves into corals and deploy their spines to prevent themselves from being eaten. Therefore, these are competing for different resources, however, they both have different mechanisms when handling this competition. Predation. Predation is a symbiotic relationship between two organisms of unlike species in which one of them acts as the predator that captures and feeds on the other organism that serves as prey. An example of this is the sea turtle, and it's consuming several organisms in the coral reef. For example, the sea turtle preys on different organisms such as sea urchins, sea sponges, sea grasses, and macroalgae. All of these organisms make up the diet of a sea turtle. Therefore, the prey is being preyed upon by the larger organism, which is the sea turtle, in order for the sea turtle to gain nutrients and necessities.
This is an example of a parasitic web-food interaction. As seen in the picture, spiders and table coral is an example of a parasitic relationship. In this case, the sea spider is the parasite and the coral is the host. The sea spider larva will pierce individual polyps of the coral and live inside them. As a result, the sea spider will then gain food and nutrients from the coral. This helps the sea spider conserve energy in looking for food, but harms the coral because its supply of nutrients is being halved by the parasite, which is the sea spider. This is an example of a commensalism food web interaction. This is seen through the decorator crab and the ocean floor, which is seen in the GIF to the right. The decorator crab uses items it finds on the floor to camouflage itself. The crab holds decorations to its body using bristles on its back which behave like Velcro, allowing it to be disguised. Because the crab molts its shell as it grows, decorations are recycled during the molting process. This is an example of a random pattern of dispersion. Individuals in a population are dispersed randomly with no predictable pattern. For example, coral within a coral reef is dispersed randomly. Random dispersion is one of the most rare patterns of dispersion. Coral reefs are dispersed randomly because they have the ability to live anywhere within a coral reef environment, but are limited to wherever they are planted. This is an example of a uniform pattern of dispersion. This means that individuals in a population can be more or less equally spaced apart. For example, a damselfish. Organisms that disperse uniformly do this because they are territorial creatures that do not want to interfere with others in their population when competing for food, mating, and other resources. Damselfish are also very territorial and tend to distribute themselves equally apart throughout the coral reef. This is an example of a clumped pattern of dispersion. A clumped pattern of dispersion means that individuals in a population are clumped together, creating some patches with many individuals and some with no individuals. For example, the yellow tang coral reef fish is an example of a clumped pattern of dispersion. The yellow tang fish located in many coral reefs and travel in schools or in clusters of individuals of that population. This active traveling with other individuals provides a way of protection from predators due to their massive school size.
This is a type 2 survivorship curve for coral, showing that throughout the lifespan of the coral, the death rate is relatively constant. This is a similar survivorship curve to animals such as squirrels and birds. For the nitrogen cycle, waste and decaying matter break down into ammonia. Ammonia-eating bacteria then converts the ammonia into nitrites. Nitrite-eating bacteria converts nitrites into nitrates. Plants, algae, and other organisms will use sunlight and nitrates to sustain life. Microscopic organisms in water and on land consume the plants and algae. Smaller fish and animals consume the microscopic organisms. Big fish and animals eat the smaller ones. These big fish and animals then return to waste and decaying matter that breaks down into ammonia, restarting the cycle again. Within the nitrogen cycle, nitrogen cycling is performed by many organisms that live on corals, and without control of that system, coral growth would decline. For the carbon cycle, carbon dioxide is exchanged between the air and the sea. Plants remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Animals will then eat those plants, releasing carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere and into the water. Sea creatures build their shells from dissolved carbonates. Coral reefs also will absorb calcium ions and carbon dioxide from surrounding water in order to help them build their calcium carbonate skeletons. This allows for the ocean to become a carbon sink for the atmosphere. Without this, there would be significantly more carbon dioxide within the air. For the water cycle, water evaporates from oceans, lakes, and streams, and it transpires from plants. It will condense into clouds, and water precipitates from those clouds in the form of rain, snow, sleet, etc. back to the ground. Surface runoff from precipitation is absorbed into groundwater. As far as coral reefs go, severe weather patterns from the water cycle can severely damage them. For human disturbances, there are many to coral reefs. However, one of the most significant is unsustainable fishing methods and the many destructive ways that humans have found to catch sea animals residing in coral reefs. One such way is through dynamite fishing, where explosives are used to stun or to kill fish. These explosives will shatter coral colonies and can reduce these colonies to rubble within a few blasts. Another way that fishermen have tried to catch fish within coral reefs is the use of cyanide. Cyanide is used to stun fish and keep them alive for live reef food fish or for aquarium fish markets. Cyanide is dumped or sprayed onto reefs and can damage and kill corals purely from the toxic chemicals. Many corals are also further destroyed when fishermen are trying to retrieve the fish and they are unconscious of the damage that they are incurring on the surrounding corals. Fishermen don't discriminate in what fish they are targeting and end up killing many juveniles who then cannot reproduce and leave more fish behind on the corals, which further reduces the productivity of the ecosystem.